So I figure if you have tuned into this channel, you're expecting me to be talking about progressive rock and progressive metal. And if you look on the shelves behind me, you're going to take notice that I have a lot of varied interests, actually, besides just prog rock and metal. And that includes musical genres. Just like any other human being on the planet, I have interests and tastes that actually span a wide variety. So, what I thought would be fun to do would be dig in my personal music collection and pull out my 10 favorite obscure non-prog albums. Mostly because I enjoy sharing things that are new with people and I enjoy digging into the obscure stuff. And these are artists that I just feel like never quite got the attention they deserved. So, thought it would be fun to share them with you. So, stand by, hang out, and I'm going to share with you my 10 favorite obscure non-prog albums right after this. Hey, welcome to Bleeding Edge. I am Dave. Thank you for joining me. As I mentioned in the intro, this is my top 10 list of obscure non-prog albums, artists that I really enjoy, and albums in particular that I really enjoy that, aren't all that well known and certainly are not progressive rock. Many of these are early favorites of mine before I was old enough to really understand what prog was and really had a concept of it before I developed my love of the specific genre. Some have a prog connection. Some do not. You might be surprised. And again, I recognize that obscurity often has to do a lot with where your ass is currently planted. So some of these may not be as obscure to people in Europe or the UK or Canada as they are to those of us in the US. And at least one of these, one of the two bonus albums I mentioned in the intro, is a big wild card with that really absolutely shows the discrepancy between success and obscurity based on exactly where you are geographically speaking. And as I said, I've mentioned a bonus pick or two that I'm going to include. So let's have some fun with this. Let us get started, and we start with an album that has a couple of surprising connections to it. Yes, coming in at number 10, we have Jackalope with their debut album, It Dreams. Now, Jackalope is a band that came out of Canada, and they were a project dreamed up by producer Dave Rave Ogilvy, and it was to be centered around the talents of vocalist Katie B, as in boy, and the goal of creating what they wanted to call an industrial pop band. Interesting animal, I guess. It might be a little strange to think of industrial and pop together, but not really. Turned out to be some pretty cool stuff, alternating between pop hooks, an aggressive alternative, and an infusion of industrial heaviness. And it made some headway in the Canadian charts, being known a little bit here and there. They even apparently were referred to, I guess, as the Canadian Evanescence, although the styles between the two bands are pretty divergent, as you would have heard in the clips. Other than the fact that they are bands featuring aggressive music fronted by guitars and female vocalists, that's about all they have in common, which is kind of superficial, to be perfectly honest. But I guess it's the timing, because it was their early aughts when Evanescence was a big thing, and these folks came out shortly thereafter. Interesting to note that there are songwriting credits to one Trent Reznor. Yes, Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails co-wrote several songs on this album, helping to solidify their industrial cred, along with Ogilvy as the producer. For me, my attention was originally drawn to them through reading that Alex Lifeson, Lurkst of Rush, contributed a solo to one of the songs on their second album. And it's kind of interesting to note that Trent Reznor is a big Rush fan, so circuitously, Rush keeps coming back in, and they're a Canadian band, so I guess maybe Rush had to be there one way or another. Now, Katie B left the band after the second album to pursue her own solo career, and at that point, the sound kind of changed a bit. It feels like it went a little more pop. The vocalist was very different than Katie B. Turned out to be their last album. But I got to say, these first two albums have some really cool stuff. It can be dark. It can have some pop bounciness to it. It can have some industrial stuff to it. And it's definitely a cool and unique mix. And if there's anything I love, it is a unique sound. And these guys had it in spades. So you might want to check that out sometime. It's a pretty fine album. And actually, both albums are quite good. Meanwhile, the next album qualifies probably as the proggiest album on this list, although in some ways, that prog ambition may have been what doomed it. I only know that I believe what I see. Do you see what's out of arms? I'm waiting. Oh, this is straight from the top. We'll never stop. We can't be stopped with your power. When he talked in his sleep, oh yeah. And his mother called security. At number 9, the album we're talking about is Planet P Project with the second album under that name entitled Pink World. Now, Planet P Project's an interesting animal, and it's the project of an interesting guy. The person I'm talking about is Tony Carey, who is a multi-instrumentalist, but first probably became known to the wider world as the original keyboardist for Rainbow. And the only album he played on was Rising, and he went on that tour, but he left the band shortly thereafter. Personality clashes just didn't work out the way probably they might have wanted to. So that's that. And he moved on and started doing solo work. Now, for him, his solo work primarily might have been considered something more along the lines of straight ahead rock. He created Planet P Project as his outlet for his kind of spacier, odder, more conceptual stuff that didn't fit with the straight-ahead rock of his solo albums. For example, his Ode to Astronaut Anxiety, entitled Why Me, did get attention on MTV, made some waves, got some notice, made some minor waves on rock radios. In fact, that's where I first was introduced to Planet P Project, not realizing that that was the same as the dude who was singing I Won't Be Home Tonight, which was a straight-ahead rock tune. Tony Carey, both of them. Didn't know that at the time. Nobody was making note of that. Anyway, that song got some attention. And in the same year that this album was released, his solo album under his own name, Some Tough City, included some minor hits in First Day of Summer and A Fine, Fine Day. Both very cool slice of life songs. And so this album, containing this grand narrative concept of a young boy who gains immense psychic and telekinetic powers from exposure to toxic chemicals, and then gets captured and indoctrinated by the government so they can use him as a weapon. And then he eventually saves the country or part of the country from nuclear holocaust. Yeah, that got kind of dark. And eventually turned that area that he saved into a totalitarian dictatorship. Maybe that concept at the moment was maybe just a little too heavy for the general public to glom onto. Certainly a far cry from songs about somebody's uncle getting out of jail and coming back to town, or a couple of guys hitting the car and driving out to California on the first day of summer. This was grand conceptual storytelling and really pretty solid in many ways. Yeah, the album is a double album, and it's a little overstuffed with these brief instrumental interludes and digressions that don't add a lot to the album, being a little perhaps stiff in the production. But overall, it's a good, solid album, and the concept put forth here is really very well fleshed out. This is a full-fledged story that goes in directions you may not expect it to go, and gets kind of dark at times. Matter of fact, when you talk about somebody's mom selling him out to security just because of things he was saying, that's some dark stuff going on there. Some really solid songwriting on display. And Tony Carey apparently was like a one-man band. He played most of the instruments throughout the album, provided his own backing vocals, and the only exceptions being a few guest instrumentalists who popped in to maybe do a guitar solo here, a little bit of saxophone there, adding a little bit of flavor and panache to the proceedings. But it is, admittedly, for me, maybe a little bit of a guilty pleasure. There maybe is some aspects of it that can be equally cheesy, but balancing that out with Pink Floyd type elements and Alan Parsons type elements and things like that. Overall, it's a good, solid album. It really does not get, I think, as much attention as it deserved, but it really did seem to get lost in the sauce in mid 1984. So it is what it is. Meanwhile, up next, we've got a band that I'm still shocked seems to have never risen above the level of regional darling.
Stay ahead, stay into the fire, stay ahead, take it to the I need a reason to feel like I do. I live the way I want to, I can't wait for you. What we feel, as long as we can feel with our hearts, we're the winners. We're the winners.
At number 8, what I'm talking about is Shooting Star, and the album is Burning. This one, why it got overlooked, I'm not sure. It is early 80s gold AOR rock in the vein of Journey and Night Ranger and Kansas. Straight ahead hard rock, but not too hard. It blends guitars and keyboards and violin. Yep, I said violin in nearly equal measure. And in some ways, that's where I can think about at least reading one review that kind of compared them to Kansas, but actually said they were cooler than Kansas. That may be debatable, but it's the fact that the violin was there and was a presence in most of their songs to varying degrees. But these are hook-laden songs with slick production and positive messages and mid-tempo rockers, driving rockers, all kinds of rockers. I got to stop saying the word rockers. What I recall at the time is it was barely noticeable on radio. It got a little bit of airplay for maybe 6 to 12 months, not to the degree to which I think it deserved, and then kind of just disappeared. And it's not like these guys did not have a solid career up to this point. This was their 4th album, and they'd gotten some definite notice with the previous albums, but it seemed to be very much located and limited to their Midwestern region where they came from. Not sure what else held them back other than, I don't know, maybe struggling to stand out more from these other bands that I mentioned. Maybe insufficient marketing. Maybe they got lost a little bit. This was 83, so they had the burgeoning pop metal scene coming around as Def Leppard and Quiet Riot had these huge hits and maybe drew some of the attention away from bands that sounded maybe like they still belonged in the 70s a little bit. Didn't bother me at all. It was some really cool stuff. And interesting to note, about a year or two later, all of a sudden in Philadelphia, I don't know if it happened anywhere else, but all of a sudden, a song from their first album started getting a lot of frequent airplay. And this is like this nearly 7-minute long mini epic called Last Chance. And big grand idea, long build-up, long instrumental section in the midst of this song that includes somebody on timpanis and all this, gave it a little bit of a big orchestral feel. And all of a sudden that song came out of nowhere, but also in and of itself a very cool jam that was really indicative of their album, of their career. And unfortunately, this is also maybe their peak thereabouts, because they had one more album after this before they kind of disappeared. And that album didn't do any better, although it got some good critical reviews. They just kind of disappeared, and they put out some greatest hits albums here and there, and I think they may have reunited once or twice to put some stuff out, but this was kind of the end of their very regionally limited heyday, sadly to say. All right, well, moving on, we next have a band that has a name from one of Elton John's artsiest songs, and this album that represents a very significant stylistic pivot for them.
Can I survive this world of the sea? But
So yes, when you think of very artsy song titles by Elton John, I gotta think Funeral for a Friend comes up. And it's not just the title, but the song itself is pretty artsy and maybe almost him being kind of prog, really, if you want to get down to it. And the album is Tales Don't Tell Themselves. Now, these guys are a Welsh band, and they had 2 albums before this one. This was their third. But those first 2 albums were definitely, definitively, without a doubt, easily categorized as post-hardcore, aka screamo. They were not the band that you hear on this album. This one, all of a sudden, they have this big conceptual thing. They ditch the very personal songs about teen angst and relational conflicts and family conflicts and whatever. Now all of a sudden you have this grand concept album about a fisherman lost at sea and trying to get back to his family. So a lot of ocean references and sea references and these, grand horizons and everything that called for an epic sound, an epic rock sound. And this time they brought smoother production to it instead of what you heard on the punkier predecessors. No more harsh vocals. Again, no more personal introspective songs. We are now talking grand storytelling. And thematically, stylistically, big departure from the first 2 albums. And it split the fan base a little bit, but it's where I kind of caught on to the story, and I dug it. Like previously, the album before this is considered really one of the hallmarks and one of the high watermarks of the emo, alternative, whatever you want to call it, era in the early aughts. And so it's a big surprise that they came back with something so very different, much more streamlined, much more with touches of progressive rock, orchestral elements and orchestra playing within the band. So definitely some different stuff going on there, much more melodic. Yeah, and it's comparatively less complex than typical prog, so I don't want to say this is a progressive rock album, despite the fact that it is a conceptual album. But huge hooks throughout, heavy guitars, melodic, anywhere from mid-tempo to in-your-face driving rock to the closing song of the album, The Sweetest Wave, which begins with basically grand piano that slowly builds into this huge rocker. And I don't mean like hard rock, I mean grand rocker in the grandest prog style. Just some really cool stuff. So it was definitely a big, big change for them. I enjoyed the change, and I enjoyed stuff of their other albums. But eventually they did drift back to the post-hardcore label that they had originally been given. Why they went in this digression and changed their sound so significantly for 2 albums, and especially in this one coming off of a very well-regarded and successful album, it's hard to say. The band has given varying explanations depending on when you've asked them. I know initially maybe they were talking about trying to push themselves out of a creative block by trying to do something different. Maybe they'd hit a wall a little bit and needed to push themselves somewhere else to be able to come up with something. I know they had come up with this grand concept of the fisherman lost at sea trying to get back to his family, and therefore felt that their more introspective rock wasn't a good fit for it, and they needed something much grander to fit the grandness of the storyline. That makes sense too. And maybe to some degree, they were fighting for identity and maybe not enjoying being given that screamo label by the press and by fans, and trying to find something else and trying to be something else. And this is the direction they took. For my money, in the end, it was a good direction. It's a really very solid melodic album, good driving rock, touches of prog, but mostly great grand hooks, and very re-listenable and easy to catch on to, very accessible, especially compared to some of the other things that they had done. But there you go. And they lasted a good while after this. They are one of the few on this list that almost didn't seem to disappear close to immediately after the album I am presenting. So good for them. And meanwhile, we move on. We go back to Canada for a duo whose main songwriter actually had greater success with lesser material, and I mean lesser, when he was part of another band. At number 6, we have Canadian duo Frozen Ghost and their self-titled debut album. The band is Arnold Lani and Wolf Hassel, and actually a very cool name that also sounds like something that you don't want to have to happen on your camping trip. They were both formerly of the band Sheriff, and we'll circle back to that in a little bit. Now, this is an album of smooth synth pop heavy songs with good catchy hooks, nice balanced instrumentation, and covering topics from censorship to drug addiction to fear on the battlefield, and some obligatory love songs in there as well. Nicely layered guitars and tastefully active bass lines are the highlights here. Now, while some critics at the time criticized them for their use of sequenced drums and keyboards, I feel like saying, give them a break, guys. They were two members of a band. They did later beef the band up for their third album to a four-piece. Another interesting note that goes with that. But these days, with time, the critical perception of them has improved a good bit. And they are recognized as really a very, very solid band to put out some really good albums that were nicely polished, had some great hooks, well produced. And hey, you might note that it's worth saying that their first album, this album, earned them a Juno in Canada. So, I guess that means something. I'd like to think it does. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it means as much as a Grammy, which is not much, but I bet they're happy to have that trophy on their shelves. Anyway, in the end, they didn't actually crack the top 100 as far as albums in the U.S. After 3 albums, they did disappear. Their only charting single was the lead single from this album, Should I See, their song about censorship, which was really a very, very good song and immediately catchy. It's one that as soon as I heard it in the radio, I liked it. Fun fact, on their second album, you can hear a guest solo on the closing song of the album, Suspended Humanation, from a very young Phil X, who is currently the guitar player for Bon Jovi, and at some point in time was guitar player for Triumph, and is currently touring with Triumph. So kind of notable that he made an appearance there very, very young. It was the first time I ever saw his name anywhere and had no idea who he was. And the way they said it, I was like, am I supposed to know who this is? No, I don't think I was. But he was certainly making waves in Canada, and certainly he's got a pretty cool gig going on for him at this point in time. Another note that I said we would circle back. As I mentioned, Arnold Lani was the primary songwriter for this. He was also a main songwriter for Sheriff. And his biggest success, I think, as a songwriter came with their 1983 song, When I'm With You. Went top 10 in Canada during its release year, and oddly and randomly, suddenly was re-released and hit the charts in the US in 1989, going to number 1. You couldn't escape it. Compared to what was being represented on these Frozen Ghost albums, this song is painfully insipid. I'm sorry, Arnold, if you're watching this. I know you wrote it for your wife at the time, and I'm sure it has a lot of meaning for you. I hate this song. I love your work with Frozen Ghost. I don't like this song, and it was all over the place, and you could not escape it. How it suddenly became a hit 6 years after its original release date is anybody's guess. I don't have the answer to that, and I did not care to research it any further to find out, because I don't care. Anyway, interesting story. I don't know. He wrote better stuff than that song, but that's the one that was a hit. Go figure. I have no answer. So, moving on, at number 5, we have a band that blends hard rock melodicism with Middle Eastern scales. All right, as we mentioned, number 5, we have Ra with Black Sun. Now, Ra, in my opinion, never, ever got close to getting the attention I think they deserved. These guys are solid. I don't know what the story was, what held them back. There are rumors of maybe a song about very questionable management that they had at one point in time that might have been part of the problem. I don't know. Probably the answer is elsewhere where I didn't find it or necessarily look for it. But they've got this signature blend of accessible hard rock with these Middle Eastern flourishes, massive hooks, and talent across the board. I mean, their leader, Sahaj Tikatin, is a multifaceted talent. He's an amazing singer. I think he even holds a record somewhere for holding a note, something like that. But he also has achieved success elsewhere as a songwriter and a producer for the likes of Sky Harbor, a rather unabashedly proggy band, and Starset, not a proggy band, but the man gets around and he is very good at what he does. And for me, this is the most consistent of their albums. And it has the most songs that I really love to listen to over and over again, especially the album closer, The Glorious, Easier Than This. Great lyrics, great song, builds up, so cool. Amazing vocal performance by Sahaj. This album has a lot of great things on it, but you almost can't go wrong with their albums because there's a lot of great songs on all of their albums. Fun notes, if you want to check them out, hunt them down. They do some really cool covers. One of them is a really energetic, bouncy cover of Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic. They really own the song and make it their own. And the other one, For Another Prog Connection, is a really cool cover of Yes's classic, I've Seen All Good People. These guys have talent in spades. And for my money, anybody that I've ever asked who remembers them, who heard them, I should say, remembers them and remembers them well. They are a band that I think once you get to know them, you're happy you did. So go check them out. So moving on. Next, we are coming to an early 90s, late 80s, early 90s college phenom of a band from Athens, Georgia. And no, I'm not talking about those guys.
Deeper and deeper, first cut me deeper. I won't play follow the leader, glory line. We're at dancing night away. Tomorrow's feasting on the day. Line, and I'm not looking down from the high wire. Turn around, oh, it's high time. Got my feet on the ground. Step up.
The band I am talking about from Athens, Georgia is Dreams So Real, and the album I'm talking about is Glory Line. Now, this is their third album, and for my money, their most polished in both production and in songcraft. This is some tight work on their part, and really, I think, turned out very, very well. Their first two albums leaned a bit more jangle pop, more indie, alternative type stuff, very, we'll say, low polish production, and I think that attracted a lot of fans on college radio. So that first album was really big. What happened is essentially, I think this is a band that got caught between two worlds and also got saddled with some unfortunate timing. So, as I mentioned, the first album was a big success on college radio, and that's what got the attention of Arista Records, who signed these guys up, said they're up and coming, we want to grab them. And there's no doubt to their talent. And then their second album, which was their first major label album, it did break into college radio, but it got more into commercial radio and actually hit the Billboard in the top 30 on their rock charts, which is not huge, but it's a band showing growth. It's a band showing momentum. Unfortunately, it kind of lost them a little bit in college radio because, they sounded a little more polished. They didn't quite sound as immediate and gritty as the first album, so we don't like it as much. Well, okay. Well, by the time this album came along, highly polished production, great tight songwriting, just sounded so good. And, well, it seemed to fall between the cracks. The jangle pop influenced by REM in the late 80s was starting to fade. For the 90s, everything was starting to drift towards grunge. These guys were a little bit heavy for the former, not heavy enough for the latter. So they fell into cracks. They didn't get there, and it's hardly their fault. Like I said, really great writing on these songs, very finely crafted lyrics examining society's flaws and hypocrisy through the lens of Southern culture. Uh, Big or bottom end as far as sound and the bass, but not too heavy, but much more than is typical for bands like REM and then the similar type sounding bands at the time. Songwriter and vocalist Barry Marler's vocals are these deep, warm, rich, velvety smooth. Really made it stand out because, again, you didn't quite get that on bands with this genre, this particular subgenre. They did a great job of balancing rock power and indie earnestness. And really, amongst all of that, they got this great cover of the Badfinger classic Day After Day. Perfect selection to fit in the midst of all their other originals. This is a great album. And you can hear growth throughout a course of their three albums, but they almost sound like a very different band at this point as well. Maybe for some too commercial, but I never thought so. And they never made big commercial inroads, not on this album. So it's a shame. After this one, they broke up. That was the end of it. And there you go. It's another sad example of a casualty falling through the cracks of the Billboard charts and never coming back from it. Anyway, worth checking out. Definitely was one of my favorite 90s albums through most of the decade until some others supplanted it just a little bit. All right, we are now going to be entering the top three. So we're talking about some big stuff. And the first of those is a band that suffered a similar fate to the previous entry. And that fate is coming to the genre party with a strong entry, but just a little too late. So that band we're talking about is Figures on a Beach, and the album is their second album, their self-titled album. And my introduction to these guys was actually unusual compared to almost anything else, is the fact that I saw them open for The Fix in the Palladium in New York in 1989-ish. And unlike most of the bands that I see open that I don't know ahead of time, these guys impressed me enough that I had to hunt down some of their music to find out more about them because it was a great set. They put on this wonderful, energetic set that immediately got your attention. They almost, were threatening to overshadow the headliner. And that's a rare thing for me. Now, the first album was, in the end, a fine slice of edgy synth pop. But, very much falling in and not rising above things like Depeche Mode and Erasure. Not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with them. I'm just saying it didn't distinguish itself. This one, their second go-around, you saw them jack up the levels of punchiness and snark and a bit of B-52's flavored quirkiness. So that made them a good bit more noticeable. This, I think, was a much more distinctive album than the first one, and it added this aggressive blend of guitar-forward danceable pop with these sardonic, almost snarling at times vocals, filled with wry observations on the quirks and hypocrisy of society and the individual singing them at times as well. A lot of bounce in this one, a lot of energy in this, and at the same time, this kind of sarcastic commentary on the human animal. There's a consistent high level of energy throughout the album, even on the quieter songs, with maybe the exception of the album closer, the sadly regretful Green, which, despite the very simple title, has a good bit of depth to it, talking about self-recrimination and such, and failing to make things the way you want them to. They did have some minor success on the charts with Accidentally 4th Street, parentheses Gloria, and their very punchy and I think fun cover of BTO's Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, which has this delightfully creative or grating, depending on who you are, recreation of that famous stutter from the chorus. You got to check it out to understand. Now, this is just another example of guys coming in with the great album with the wrong genre at the wrong time. It's not their fault. It was also their last album, sad to say. So, there we go. Moving on. Now, this next one, like several of these previous entries, contains one, a really solid cover song, and two, was the last album by the artist. Turns out it was also the first album by that artist. And it also turns out that it is a forgotten supergroup that had every reason to justifiably expect this to be a much more successful album.
I just tell them to sit on this and take a spin around. Standing on top, top of the rock. You, girl, I'm not I've been missing you every day. And so it was later when the miller told his tale.
So, the band is HSAS. The album is Through the Fire. Now, that HSAS is a bit innocuous unless you know that the letters stand for the last names of the members of the band, so clearly a four-piece. And when you add in the fact that the H is Hagar, the S is Sean, if your mind immediately goes to Sammy Hagar and Neil Sean of Journey, you are dead on. And this is the two of them getting together for that hard rock project that Neil Sean always wanted at the height of their powers in 1984. So you pretty much inclined to think that album should be a success. These guys were both huge at that moment. Neil for his work with Journey, Sammy for his solo stuff. You add in drummer Michael Shreve, there's the S, the other S, of Santana, so clearly no slouch. And the A, Kenny Aronson, coveted session bassist and touring bassist, who was known for his work with the Rick Derringer Band and touring with Billy Idol and Billy Squire and anybody else with the first name Billy he could find. How could it fail? Kind of did. A little bit. Kind of mysteriously, too, because I don't know. Lots of expectations, lots of promotion, some pretty solid early airplay. Should have done the trick. The fact that it had this impressive collection of these high-quality rock tunes, exhibiting a bit more variety, actually, than you might expect. In some cases, almost verging on prog a little bit and having a definite prog connection. I mean, it opens up with two absolutely great straight-ahead hard rock songs with Top of the Rock and Missing You. Segues into this trio of songs that all blend together. Animation is more or less like kind of jagged start-stop, rhythmically interesting examination of personal stagnation, but also that flows into this instrumental, Valley of the Kings, that flows into more or less an instrumental, Giza, to close it out. This long stretch of songs flowing together, that's not typical of your average mid-'80s hard rock metal album. Very interesting stuff. And let's not forget that they opened side 2 with a cover of Procol Harum's classic Whiter Shade of Pale, and a brilliant cover, I got to say. One of my favorite covers. They did a great, great job with it. Yeah, I don't know. Where does this go wrong? Should we be surprised, though? I don't know, because in the end, it's kind of a difficult project to make it happen because Sammy and Neil were both on different labels. The labels did not want to play nicely together. There was a big fight over who got to distribute this album. In the end, Geffen won. Then there were arguments about promotional appearances. So what Sammy and Neil did or didn't do was limited to help support the album. And that's mentioned the fact that neither one of them was really available to tour to support the album because Sammy was due in to go record VOA, his biggest solo album period, with the hit I Can't Drive 55. Neil was on the cusp of going out to record Raised on Radio with Journey. Interesting historical note, if you pay attention to the albums coming next and you remember your history, for Sammy, he was still on the upward side of his arc of success. VOA was his biggest album yet as a solo artist, and then he was going to join Van Halen, as we all know, and have huge success with them. Neil, getting ready to record Raised on Radio with Journey, well, after the string of platinum albums Journey had put out, Raised on Radio did well, but not as well. And it was the beginning of their downward side of their arc of success. And they were never, ever again as big as they were on the day this album was recorded. So Sammy and Neil met at crossroads, and they were headed different directions. So interesting to note. What are you going to do? Interesting also to note that the album, the way it was recorded, was inspired by Jackson Browne. Believe it or not, that's in detail a story for another day. But in short, they wrote the songs, they had them all put together, they had a bunch of songs, they scheduled some dates in California somewhere, I forget where, and recorded everything live with an audience. And yeah, they went back in the studio and they maybe polished some things up here and there, redubbed a Neil Schon guitar part here or there, redubbed some vocals that maybe didn't come through very well live, edited out the crowd noise except for the tail end of one of the songs. And there you go. This is how the album was recorded, which was a very interesting way to do it and not one you would hear very often. So for me, this is absolutely a hidden gem of early to mid-'80s hard rock and arena rock, and absolutely should be checked out by anybody that is a fan of that genre in particular. And surprised to hear that they didn't make it. Anyway, moving on, we finally reached number one. And that number one, we're getting to a Philadelphia legend who, outside of the Philly area, had very minor impact under his own name. But as a songwriter, he turned somebody into an icon.
Change reaction, it's on you. Change reaction, show it through. Slow motion.
And I'm betting with the clues I gave before we played the clips, a lot of you folks in Philly immediately probably knew it was Robert Hazard. This actually was less an album and more of an EP. He recorded it independently and released it under the name Robert Hazard and the Heroes. Later, when he signed to RCA, they remixed and redistributed the album nationally under the name just Robert Hazard. They turned him into a pure solo act. Now, if you weren't here, you may not know. If you were here, you certainly know. Early to mid-'80s, the Philadelphia local rock scene was banging. It was filled with classics. The Hooters, Tommy Conwell and the Young Rumblers, Baru Review, the A's, and arguably the biggest of them all, until the Hooters exploded nationally after their Live Aid appearance, was Robert Hazard. And as mentioned, this is an EP, 5 songs, 4 of which you would hear regularly on the Philadelphia airwaves, especially on WMMR. The only one they didn't play on a regular basis was his cover of Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind, which was fine by me. I skipped that one too. Not a big Dylan fan, Robert was. But this was quintessential new wave stuff in the vein of the Cars or Gary Newman, balancing synth and guitar sounds with straight-ahead rhythms and aggressive hooks and ultra-catchy hooks. And honestly, for my money, probably the most memorably ominous new wave intro ever recorded is the one for Escalator of Life, with those 2 notes echoing as it builds up to the chugging guitars, and just such a cool tune. And the only one of his that I think, other than Change Reaction, that maybe got some chart action whatsoever and got noticed outside of the Philadelphia area. This album was originally recorded at the legendary Sigma Sound Studios, and as mentioned, released independently by Robert. Um, Notable inclusions in the band, the Heroes, would be John Lilly and Rob Miller, both of whom were in the original lineup of the Hooters. Lilly is still a member of the band to this day. Rob Miller was only a member of the Hooters for their first album and then went to do something else. What? I don't know. Because I don't know. Anyway, so that's some cool connections right there. And as mentioned, while Robert had, solid success in the city, moderate to minor success outside of the city with Escalator of Life and Change Reaction, both of which got some, chart placements, it was an unreleased demo with which he made the most noise. And that song, entitled Girls Just Want to Have Fun, that it was originally recorded more of as a sardonic meditation on a guy's difficulty finding a woman willing to commit to a long-term relationship, it later became the female empowerment anthem of the 80s and turned Cyndi Lauper into an overnight sensation and eventually into an icon. The song he wrote, reportedly, in 5 minutes in his bathtub one night, that he never bothered to record himself, became legendary. So, you never know. Took him a while to get all his money from all that, too, as far as I understand. So now, while this collection, had a bunch of high-energy classics in it, his debut full-length release under RCA, not as much. A bit uneven, bit overproduced. Didn't do so well, and the label dropped him pretty quickly. He eventually moved on to recording country albums because the dude was into country music too. And unfortunately passed away at the age of 59 several years ago from cancer. So we're sad to have lost Robert Hazard. His imprint on this city is indelible. When we had the concert of life, the show of life for Pierre Robert after his passing, and we had a band to get together of local artists, all the ones I mentioned were included, and they played Robert's songs. That's how much he is a part of the fabric of the music of this city. So this remains, for me and for many others, an indisputable Philadelphia classic and an absolute time capsule of early 80s new wave that just never gets old for me. So, moving on, I mentioned we had a couple bonuses. And there are very different reasons for those bonuses. The first one I'm calling a wild card. And I'm calling it that because it is such an example of how geography can be instrumental in determining what is massively successful and what is obscure. Both at the same time.
Near a tree by a river, there's a hole in the ground where an old man of iron goes around and around. And his mind is a beacon. No big deal, he's just a white boy. Be no big deal, he's just an ordinary guy. Oh me, oh my, oh me, oh my. It'd be good to be in your shoes.
Nick Kershaw and the Riddle. Now, immediately, before we get too deep, I can imagine there are people, especially in the UK, who are maybe calling foul on me for two reasons. Now, the first one, I kind of pre-warned you. First one is, this was a huge hit in the UK. It was certified platinum. It sold 300,000 plus copies and had 3 top 10 hits. This was a massive album in the UK, and in the US, it barely registered. Both the album and the title track, the only ones to chart, didn't even break the top 100. Barely noticed, barely remembered. I don't know. It happens. The second reason folks in the UK might be calling foul is because in the clips, I included a clip of Wouldn't It Be Good? Well, as it turns out, Wouldn't It Be Good was actually released on Nick's debut album, Human Racing. Not on this one. But that's in the UK. One, I'd have to check. I don't know if Human Racing even got released in the US to begin with. But when this album came out, when the riddle came out in the US, they had removed the song City of Angels, which is in my mind a crime because that's a great song, and replaced it with Wouldn't It Be Good, which was Nick's biggest charting single before his second album, and not known here in the US, and suddenly was getting airplay in the US. So, literally for decades, I had no idea that this album did not originally include Wouldn't It Be Good. I thought it was part of the album. And it was only when I saw the album listed for streaming services that I went, what the hell? One, what's this City of Angels thing? And where the hell is Wouldn't It Be Good? They corrected and put the song listing back the way it was in the UK. So there we go. So those are two things that are a little bit weird, even just the way I'm presenting this. But this is absolutely one of the finest slices of early 80s synth pop ever recorded. And to not be a hit in the US is just mind-boggling. I am, as they would say in the UK, gobsmacked. The reason why that happened, I don't know. Anybody's guess. Was it too English for American tastes? This American didn't mind it, and I know people who also enjoyed it. I don't know. Wouldn't It Be Good is an absolutely wonderful piece of lyrical longing and personal projection, buoyed by this wistful arrangement and deceptive complexity that just gives this tension and release dynamic that's responsible for the emotional impact of the song. It's a lovely song. I loved it from the beginning, from the first time I ever heard it. Should have been bigger. The title track, meanwhile, is this bright, poppy, instantly catchy tune. It's got this bouncy bass line over these syncopated rhythms and these cryptic lyrics depicting English folklore in allegorical terms. All right, that last bit was bullshit. The lyrics were placeholders. That's what I found out recently. The lyrics were placeholders thrown in a rush to get the song recorded. Nick intended to go back and rewrite them, but the label apparently loved them, insisted they stay, so they stayed. Okay, sure. That really kind of deflates a whole bunch of things that people might have thought had more meaning to them. And in particular, as I understand, fans across the UK at the time were spending hours trying to decipher these lyrics, figure out what was meant, figure out what he was talking about. He mentions the island of Aman, and for a lot of people, they thought it was leading them to hidden treasure. Oops. I think that is hysterical. That placeholder lyrics had that impact. Anyway, that for me is funny. But meanwhile, throughout the album, Nick just does this great job of balancing these hook-laden tunes and these deceptively complex arrangements. And the fact that he could do that stems from his background in jazz fusion and rock. Yeah, he wasn't just a pop artist. He was a guy who had some chops and some compositional knowledge behind him. And it just makes this a great example of something we probably should have mentioned when we talked about progressive pop on the Prog Council a couple episodes back. And yet, meanwhile, again, it's almost unknown in the US. Interesting to note, as much as this is a synth pop album, there's some other connections with the prog world as part of it. Number one, it's produced by a man named Peter Collins. Some of you out there may recognize that name. First and foremost, in the 80s, he went on later to produce two of Rush's poppiest albums, Power Windows and Hold Your Fire, and then he came back to them and worked with them again in the mid-90s with Counterparts and Test for Echo. He also was the producer for the iconic Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche. The man's got range, clearly, if he went from this to that. Cool stuff. Also worth noting, Nick, in 91, collaborated providing vocals for Tony Banks' solo album, Still. He provided vocals for the Lamia on Steve Hackett's Genesis Revisited 2. He provided guitar for the song Humans Being for John Mitchell's Lonely Robot. And, interestingly enough, the videos for both of the hits I mentioned, Wouldn't It Be Good and The Riddle, had the legendary Storm Thorgerson as the artistic director. You know, the guy that did all those iconic Pink Floyd album covers and many others. Yeah. Prog Connections. What are we talking about? Yeah, most certainly. So this is an album. If you've not heard it, I urge you to go find it and check it out. Got some great, great music on it. Absolutely. And it's a crime that it's been overlooked in the US the way it has. Now, getting to our final bonus pick, our final album on this list. I originally put it in the top 10 and decided to take it out. And there's a reason for that. You can decide for yourself how valid the reason is, but I decided to do it because of one important fact. You can't get it anywhere. I have it, and I am probably one of the few. You might be able to find a used copy somewhere if you look for it. You can find a couple videos, I think about 3, maybe 4, posted on YouTube, but not by the band and not by the label. The label's defunct. The band is defunct. This was their one and only album, plus there was an EP. And you can't get it in streaming. You can't get it anywhere. I have it. You can't have it. And that's why I felt it was like a bit of a tease to encourage you to go find it, but I felt it needed to be mentioned. So this album and the EP by this band right here.
Eyes around me, no, there's a liar to this house. But will it be now that I would say we can't pretend it's all over? No, we can't pretend it's all over. No, we can't pretend it's all over. It's over now. One of us here's got to make the first move. One of us here has no intention to be the last to say. Put your heart out. Wicked world. Put your heart out. Real world, just listen. You wish for heaven, I give you hell. You ask for sunshine, I give you rain. You see an angel, she brings a shame. You wish for heaven, then take me. Take me. Take me. Change. Strange to see you this way. Change. Strange to be with you now. Love is blind, so I close my eyes. Love is blind, so I close my eyes.
So yes, the band King of Fools, their self-titled debut, the first album right here, released on Imago, the label that later had some success with Baby Animals and others, is now defunct. Also, this little EP. These two babies followed me home from the college radio station one night, and I made the mistake of feeding them, and they just wouldn't go away, so I kept them and enjoyed them. That's my story. Anyway, these guys absolutely deserve so much better than they got. The fact that this album basically went nowhere is a crying shame, and I don't understand it. It's such a unique blend of power rock with these alternative flourishes, indie attitude, and aggressive performances, big sound, slick production, just boom, man. This was for me at the time what I was calling a wave of alternative hard rock and metal. And a lot of those bands didn't make it because grunge ended up defining that sound by itself, and anything that wasn't grunge got excluded. And this one didn't quite fit in with the grunge attitude, I guess I would say. big, expansive sound, great crisp production, produced by the legendary British producer John Punter, who was known for his work with Roxy Music and Japan and Procol Harum. There's those guys again. For me, all these songs are just so instantly memorable. And it starts with the grandiose big guitar intro of Pretend It's Over, moves on to the moody, atmospheric centerpiece in the mid-album, Sad in Wonderland, which, is the title of the EP, and that raucous denouement of the closer, Love is Blind. This was just a banger of an album. And again, this was an album that launched a record label, Imago Records. The second release they had was Baby Animals. That did really well. It's also another lost gem. They had later had success with Amy Mann as a solo artist, but by the time the 90s were over, they were gone. They'd folded. That was it. The EP came out shortly after the album and also featured another great gem that probably should not have been left off the album, the equally hard-rocking Rising Sun, which is one of my favorites of theirs. So what are you going to do, man? You can't get it. It's out of print. The band is defunct. Can't be found. Feels like a tease to bring it up to you because I've got it and you can't have it. So it felt a little bit unfair. That's why I call this a bonus. But I don't know. To me, this is basically the ultimate description of an obscure album and an obscure artist. But I will note, I am not the only one that know they exist. If you go to allmusic.com, you will find the review of them, and it's a very positive review with 4 out of 5 stars. I'm not the only one on this bandwagon. Not at all. So there you go. There's the full list. That's all of them. Which of these albums did you already know, if any? Which of these albums do you want to go check out, if any? Am I still the only one liking most of these at the end of this? Did I create some new fans? Let me know in the comments. Share some of your thoughts on all of this. And hopefully I've introduced some people to some new music they're going to love. I would be very happy about that. While you're leaving a comment, if you don't mind, if you got this far, I hope you liked the video. So give it a like if you could. And hey, if you've checked out my other stuff and you enjoy what I'm doing, hit that subscribe button. You can follow along on our proggy adventures on Bleeding Edge, including the Prog Council, which has new stuff coming up later. So check it all out. Take a moment, see if you might want to look at the link in the description for the Bleeding Edge shop. You might be able to find an item or two you enjoy. Or if you just want to buy me a coffee, that's awesome too. There's a link for that as well. And until next time, I'll just remind you to hang loose, never fear to deviate from the norm, and as always, keep it proggy and maybe keep it obscure.